Okay, the next thing I'm going to demonstrate is the integration between Micronaut and the Oracle Cloud SDK, and in particular, object storage. So I'm going to switch back to my application here, and I'm going to go to the build.gradle, and I'm going to add a dependency on the object storage SDK API. This is the official Java client for object storage, which I can add in my build.gradle. Now note that if I didn't already have the Micronaut Oracle Cloud SDK dependency, I would need to add it as well. This is because the presence of this Micronaut Oracle Cloud SDK object allows Micronaut to automatically set up an object storage client and make it available to the application as a bean. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my application, and I'm going to create a new Java interface, and we're going to call it download service. And the download service is going to be a simple interface that defines a single method, and it's going to return a maybe streamed file, and define a method called download that downloads that streamed file, right? Now, streamed file is a type in Micronaut that allows you to, in a non-blocking manner, stream files to the response, and essentially do streaming use cases with Micronaut. So that's my simple interface. Obviously, this is a very trivial example. Probably you would want to like download files for a particular name, whatever. But I'm just going to hard code those for the moment. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an implementation of that interface. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go new Java template, and I'm going to create a new Java class. And we're going to call this Oracle Cloud Download Service. And this is going to implement the download service interface. And we're going to make it implement that interface simply by applying the appropriate refactoring. So by default, the IDE tooling here will essentially throw an unsupported operation exception. That is clearly, that needs to be filled out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to define an injector bean of type Rx object storage object storage client object storage Rx client. That's what it is. Object storage Rx client. So there's my object storage client, and I'm going to inject that into the constructor of my Oracle Cloud object storage type. And in addition to that, I'm going to make it a bean by defining it as a singleton. And in addition to that, what you can do is, because this class depends on the Oracle Cloud SDK, if you wanted to continue your application to continue to be cloud independent, what you could do is add two requirements to the class. You can say at requires classes, and you can say that object storage needs to be on the class path for the service to function, and also that at requires environment equals environment Oracle Cloud. So what this does is it says that this bean will only be enabled when an object storage client is available to be injected, such as when you are running in the Oracle Cloud environment. You can then, for example, come along and define another class. Let's call it default download service, for example, that implements the download service interface as well. And this will provide the default implementation, which just returns nothing. In this case, maybe.empty, which is in RxJava terms, just saying that nothing will be returned. And what you can say is this is another singleton bean of the same type, and it requires no other beans. It requires essentially no other beans, so missing beans of type download service. like that. Okay, so essentially what this is stating is that this service will be loaded as the default when no other implementation is provided, right? So it's a very simple and elegant way to do it in Micronaut. You can easily define default beans that are loaded in the case where no specific implementation is present, such as when we're streaming via Oracle Cloud. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my Oracle Cloud implementation, and I'm going to want to return a client dot get object method, and what that's going to return is essentially a get object response. And for that, I need to supply a get object request. So I'm going to construct a get object request using the get object request builder API. And I'm going to introduce a variable. And there's a few things that you need to supply here. You need to supply the bucket name, which in this case, I already have created a bucket ahead of time called my bucket. You also need to supply the namespace name, which is typically your your tenancy. So Cloud Native DevRel is the name of our tenancy. And you need to supply the object name. I already have an object called profile image that I've uploaded. And then you can build that into your request object and introduce a variable that you can pass on to the request. So what happens here now is that when you call get object, it's actually going to return a RxJava single as the response. That's a non-blocking type. So this is a non-blocking request that does not block and is essentially reactive programming. And however, as you can see, my type return type is a maybe, and the reason we chose maybe is because we want essentially a page not found 404 to be returned if the object doesn't exist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call get object, and then I'm going to call flatmap maybe to transform it into a maybe of the type that I want. So as you can see, we're returning a maybe stream file. So this is a bit like the Java Streams API, where you can map objects to different types. So I'm going to return a new streamed file instead, and I'm going to pass in the input stream and a media type that is going to be the JPEG. I'll type JPEG because I know the file that I'm getting is JPEG. Obviously, you could, inspect the object and return an appropriate type, but I'm just going to hardcode that for JPEG for the purposes of this example. And then what I'm going to do is, in addition to that, is I'm going to basically, so this, if I just return this, and in fact, I think I need to wrap this in a maybe itself. So if I did wrap this in maybe just, that will probably fix my compilation error that I'm experiencing right now. And what I can do next is I can add some just kind of default error handling that if there's an error retrieving the object, just complete and forget about, such as life, etc. So that I can return that. And that's essentially my implementation for Oracle Cloud, right? It's going to make the request object storage, retrieve the response object using flatmap, and then emit a streamed file so that Micronaut starts to stream the object back to the browser in a completely streaming, non-blocking manner. And if anything goes wrong, just like complete and return a file not found. So the way to connect this out into kind of the web is to go into my controller. And what I can do is add an additional construct argument here for my download service. Let's make it final as well. And probably what I can just do to simplify this is regenerate my constructor. There we go. So I regenerated my constructor to basically populate both the repository and the download service using dependency injection. And now what I can do is I can add an additional endpoint here. And let's call it, because we're having, this books concept, we can say this is going to be like author profile or something like that. And it's going to return a maybe type streamed file, and it's called download as well. And then we do this .download service .download and return that. And that's essentially my implementation. So we're calling the download service, saying download my profile image. We can now pop over to my application class, start my application up, and essentially we can head over to a browser. If I switch over here to Safari and open up a new browser and go to 8080, and I go to author profile, books / author profile, and we get a huge, massive image of myself streamed back from object storage via the Oracle Cloud SDK using Micronaut's non-blocking capabilities and streaming. And it was all relatively simple to put together, and that is essentially it. So Oracle Cloud SDK plus object storage plus Micronaut, all done in no time.